18.7 Hz signal. When the sky opened at 2:17 a.m. Part 1. The frequency nobody was meant to hear. Cosmic analog horror, psychological mystery. The signal began like a whisper. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a faint vibration hidden deep inside the background noise of the world. Most people never noticed it, but some did, and those people would never sleep the same again. Evan Mercer worked the night shift at a small atmospheric monitoring station on the outskirts of the desert. The facility sat miles away from the nearest town, surrounded by empty roads and rusted radio towers that hummed softly in the wind. Most nights were quiet. His job was simple: monitor environmental frequencies, record unusual electromagnetic patterns, and send reports to a research center in Washington. It was boring work, until the night the signal appeared. The digital clock on Evan's desk read 2:17 a.m. Outside, the sky was perfectly clear. Thousands of stars stretched across the darkness like scattered diamonds. Inside the monitoring room, a dozen old analog machines hummed and flickered quietly. Then one of them began to shake. At first, Evan thought it was a mechanical glitch. The frequency monitor showed a sudden spike, 18.7 Hz. He frowned. That's strange. Low-frequency signals like that usually came from natural phenomena, earthquakes, atmospheric disturbances, maybe even distant lightning storms. But the sensors showed nothing unusual. No seismic activity, no storms, no interference. Just the signal, a steady pulse, 18.7 Hz, over and over and over. Like a heartbeat buried beneath reality. Evan adjusted his headphones and listened to the audio output. What he heard made his stomach twist. It sounded wrong. The frequency was technically below normal human hearing, but the equipment translated it into a faint, audible tone, a deep humming vibration. But beneath the hum, something else moved, something irregular, almost like breathing. Evan leaned closer to the monitor. That can't be right. He checked the antenna feeds. All systems were working normally. The signal was real, and it was getting stronger. 30 minutes later, the signal had doubled in intensity. The computer logs showed something even stranger. The frequency wasn't just transmitting, it was spreading. Other monitoring stations across the network had begun detecting it too. Locations hundreds of miles away, then thousands. Evan opened the national sensor map. Red dots were appearing across the screen, each one marking a station that had begun receiving the same signal. 18.7 Hz. The same rhythm, the same pulse. Like something enormous had started broadcasting from somewhere on Earth, or somewhere above it. Evan sent a report to the research center. Minutes later, his phone rang. Dr. Elaine Foster, the lead signal analyst, spoke quickly. "Evan, we're seeing your data." "Good," Evan said. "Because something is definitely wrong." "How strong is the signal now?" He checked the screen. His voice dropped slightly. It just increased again. There was a pause on the line. That shouldn't be possible. Why? Because frequencies like that don't amplify themselves. Evan stared at the monitor. But it is. Another silence. Then Elaine said something quietly. "Evan, do you feel anything?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" "Head pressure, anxiety, unease." Evan didn't answer immediately, because he did feel something. A strange tension behind his eyes, a subtle vibration in the back of his skull, like his brain was responding to something his ears couldn't fully hear. "How did you know?" he asked. Elaine exhaled slowly. "Because we're feeling it too." By 2:45 a.m., something strange was happening across the monitoring network. Reports started coming in from technicians around the country. Headaches, dizziness, nausea. A few claimed they could actually hear the signal without equipment. A deep vibration inside their heads. And then came the visual disturbances. One technician in Nevada reported seeing dark shapes moving across the sky. Another in Oregon claimed the stars were flickering in unnatural patterns. At first, the research center assumed stress or coincidence, until the satellites started reporting anomalies too. Several orbital sensors detected subtle distortions in the upper atmosphere, tiny fluctuations in gravitational readings. Something was interacting with the planet, something massive, something invisible. At 3:06 a.m., the first camera malfunction occurred. A weather satellite briefly lost visual feed over the western United States. When the signal returned 30 seconds later, the sky looked different. The stars appeared slightly misaligned, not dramatically, just enough to make astronomers uncomfortable, like the sky had shifted a few degrees, or something behind it had moved. Back at the monitoring station, Evan noticed something else. The signal had begun forming patterns. The once steady pulse was now changing rhythm. 18.7 Hz, pause. 18.7 Hz, pause. 3 short pulses, 1 long, then silence. Then the pattern repeated. He stared at the screen. Is that code? Elaine was quiet for several seconds. Then she said the words that made Evan's chest tighten. It looks like it. At 3:41 a.m., the first major incident happened. A power station in Arizona suddenly shut down. No damage, no overload. The systems simply stopped working for 12 seconds. During those 12 seconds, every monitoring station in the region recorded the same thing. The signal had spiked to its highest level yet, 19.1 Hz. Then it dropped back to normal, but the pattern was now unmistakable. The signal was adjusting itself, like something was testing the planet, learning, listening, adapting. And then, Evan saw something that made his blood run cold. Outside the station's window, the sky had changed. He stepped outside slowly. The desert air was still, silent. The stars looked brighter than usual, but they were also moving, not fast, not obviously, but slowly drifting into new positions, like pieces on a cosmic chessboard being rearranged. Evan whispered to himself, "That's impossible." Then the vibration in his skull grew stronger. The signal was louder now, much louder. For the first time, he could hear it without the equipment. A deep humming tone vibrating through the air itself. 18.7 Hz. The entire sky seemed to pulse with it. Inside the station, alarms suddenly began flashing. Evan ran back to the monitors. The satellite feed had returned, but the image froze him in place, because something enormous had appeared above the atmosphere. Not a ship, not an asteroid, something stranger. The sky itself looked cracked, a faint red fracture stretching across the upper atmosphere, barely visible, but growing. And the digital clock on Evan's desk ticked forward. 2:17 a.m. Again, the clock had reset itself. Time itself had looped. Outside the building, the humming signal grew louder. The crack in the sky slowly widened, and something on the other side was beginning to push through. The 18.7 Hz signal, when the sky opened at 2:17 a.m., Part 2. The sky was never empty. Cosmic analog horror psychological mystery. For a moment, Evan Mercer couldn't move. The monitor in front of him displayed the satellite feed in frozen silence. Above the Earth's atmosphere, the sky was splitting open. Not like lightning, not like clouds parting. It looked like a fracture in glass. A long glowing crack stretching across the darkness above the planet, and it was growing, slowly, deliberately. Evan felt the vibration again, the signal, 18.7 Hz. Now it wasn't just inside the equipment, it was everywhere. The walls hummed with it, the floor trembled slightly beneath his boots. Even the air seemed to vibrate with a deep, invisible pulse. His phone crackled. Dr. Elaine Foster's voice burst through the speaker. "Evan, are you seeing the satellite feed?" "Yes," he whispered. "Tell me I'm wrong." There was silence for several seconds. Then she answered, "You're not?" Across the monitoring network, every sensor on the planet was reporting the same anomaly. Gravitational readings were fluctuating. Magnetic fields were bending in unusual patterns. And the signal, the impossible 18.7 Hz frequency, had become global. Every receiver on Earth could hear it now. Military stations, weather satellites, civilian communication towers. Even old analog radios began picking it up. A low humming sound that vibrated through speakers around the world. No one knew where it was coming from, but everyone could feel it. At 2:17 a.m., something changed. The signal stopped. Just for a moment. The sudden silence was worse than the sound. For nearly 2 hours the vibration had filled the world. Now it was gone. The quiet felt unnatural, heavy, like the entire planet was holding its breath. Evan stared at the sky through the station window. The stars were still drifting slowly across the darkness, but now the crack was clearly visible. A thin red fracture cutting across the heavens. It stretched from one horizon to the other, and it was glowing, not bright, but alive. Like something enormous was pressing against the other side. The silence lasted exactly 12 seconds. Then the signal returned. But this time it was different. Stronger, deeper. The equipment screens lit up with warning alerts. Frequency spike detected. 19.4 Hz, 19.8 Hz, 20.1 Hz. Evan's heart began pounding. That's impossible, he muttered. The human brain is sensitive to low-frequency vibrations. Certain ranges can trigger anxiety, fear, even hallucinations. But this signal wasn't just affecting the brain. It was affecting reality itself. Outside the station, the wind began to move. The desert sands shifted across the ground like waves. The sky pulsed once, and the crack widened. Across the world, people began noticing strange things. In cities, streetlights flickered in strange patterns. Animals became restless. Dogs howled at the sky. Birds abandoned their nests and flew in chaotic circles. In some places, people reported hearing whispers, not through speakers, inside their heads. Soft voices buried beneath the humming frequency. Words no one could fully understand, but everyone agreed on one thing. The voices were not human. Inside the research center in Washington, panic was spreading. Scientists rushed between control rooms as new data streamed in. Satellite cameras were zooming in on the fracture above Earth, and the images were getting clearer. The crack wasn't just a visual distortion, it was a tear, a break in space itself. Dr. Forster stared at the screen in disbelief. Space-time integrity is collapsing. A young technician looked at her. You mean, like a wormhole? Elaine shook her head slowly. No, her voice dropped. Wormholes are circular. The screen zoomed in further. The fracture looked jagged, uneven, like something had forced its way through the fabric of reality. From the other side. Back in the desert station, Evan felt the vibration intensify again. The signal was now above 21 Hz. The humming tone had turned into a deep roar in his ears. He grabbed the desk to steady himself. The walls trembled slightly. Dust drifted from the ceiling, and outside the window, the sky opened. The crack suddenly split wider. The red glow behind it expanded like an enormous eye opening in the heavens. For a second, Evan thought it was just light. Then he realized something horrifying. It wasn't light, it was movement. Something enormous was shifting behind the tear in reality. Something alive. The satellite feed confirmed it. Dark shapes were visible behind the fracture. Massive silhouettes moving slowly across the glowing void. Each one larger than entire cities. The shapes moved like creatures swimming through an ocean. Slow, graceful, ancient. And they were watching. One of them turned. For a brief moment, its outline became visible through the crack. A shape that made no sense to the human mind. Too large, too complex, too wrong. Evan felt his stomach twist violently. His brain tried to process what he was seeing, but it couldn't. The human mind had no reference for something like that. The signal suddenly changed again. The pattern returned. 3 pulses, 1 long vibration, pause, then the cycle repeated. Evan stared at the monitor. They're communicating. Elaine's voice came through the phone again. Yes. Her voice sounded hollow. We think the signal is synchronization. With what? Another pause. With us, across the planet, people began collapsing. Hospitals reported waves of patients with severe headaches and seizures. Pilots reported strange visual distortions in the sky. Entire electrical grids flickered in strange patterns, and everywhere, the humming signal continued. 21.7 hertz, 21.7 hertz, 21.7 hertz. The same pulse, repeating endlessly, like a key turning inside a cosmic lock. Then the worst discovery arrived. One of the satellites captured a new image. Something had emerged from the fracture. Not fully, just a small piece. But it was enough to terrify the scientists watching. A long, dark structure had extended through the crack. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't a machine. It looked more like a limb, an enormous tendril of something ancient and alien, and it was reaching toward Earth. Slowly, carefully, like a hand testing the surface of water. Back in the monitoring station, Evan whispered the question no one wanted to ask. Why now? Elaine answered quietly. Because we opened the door. Evan frowned. What door? Her voice trembled slightly. The signal isn't coming from them. He felt a chill run through his body. Then where is it coming from? The answer was worse than anything he expected. From Earth. Outside the station, the sky continued to split open. The red fracture spread wider across the stars, and the enormous shadows behind it began moving closer. The signal grew louder. 22.0 hertz. The vibration shook the ground beneath Evan's feet, and for the first time since the event began, the voices inside the signal became clear. Not whispers anymore. Words, cold, ancient, patient, a single phrase repeating again and again. You called. And above the earth, something on the other side of the sky was beginning to come through. The sky was no longer the sky. Across the planet, people stared upward in silent horror as the red fracture above Earth spread wider and wider. The stars behind it were disappearing, not fading, vanishing, as if something enormous was blocking them from the other side. The signal continued vibrating across the world. 22.0 hertz. The hum had grown so powerful that glass windows rattled in their frames. Streetlights flickered. Power grids struggled to maintain stability. And everywhere, the same whisper echoed in human minds. You called. Inside the small desert monitoring station, Evan Mercer gripped the edge of the control desk. His hands were shaking. The satellite feed now showed the crack in the sky stretching nearly halfway across the planet's upper atmosphere. But something worse had appeared. Movement. The enormous shadow behind the fracture had pushed farther through the opening. What had once looked like a distant silhouette now had shape, form, and scale that made the human brain recoil. The thing emerging from the sky was larger than entire continents. It moved slowly, like a deep-sea creature drifting through invisible water. Long black tendrils stretched outward from its body, each one hundreds of miles long, and every movement sent ripples through the atmosphere itself. Evan's phone crackled again. Dr. Elaine Foster sounded breathless. Evan, we have confirmation. Confirmation of what? A long pause followed. Then she spoke quietly. It's inside our universe now. Evan's throat went dry. You mean that thing? Yes? How big is it? Elaine didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight of disbelief. We think it's bigger than the moon. Across the world, governments were reacting with panic. Military command centers lit up with emergency alerts. Fighter jets scrambled into the air. Satellite weapon systems were activated, but no one knew what they were facing. The creature, or whatever it was, did not resemble anything biological or mechanical. It moved like a living storm, like a shadow made of impossible geometry. Parts of its body seemed to fade in and out of existence as it passed through the tear in reality. Human physics simply didn't apply to it. Then the signal changed again. The pulse pattern accelerated. 3 pulses, pause, 5 pulses, pause, 7 pulses. And with every new cycle, the enormous being in the sky moved closer to Earth. Elaine's voice came back over the phone. We think the signal is guiding it. Evan stared at the screen. Guiding it where? She hesitated. Here. At 3:52 a.m., the first major disaster occurred. In Nevada, An entire electrical grid suddenly overloaded. Power surged through thousands of transformers simultaneously. The system collapsed within seconds. Cities across the region went dark. But the blackout wasn't caused by the grid itself. Every monitoring device in the area recorded the same anomaly. The signal had spiked to 23.1 Hz for 12 seconds. Then it dropped again. It was becoming stronger, more precise, more controlled, like something was learning how to use it. Back at the station, Evan noticed something terrifying on the satellite feed. The giant tendril that had first emerged from the fracture was moving downward, slowly descending toward Earth. It pierced through the upper atmosphere like a black needle sliding through water. Clouds twisted around it in spirals. Lightning flickered along its surface. And the deeper it moved into the atmosphere, the louder the signal became. Across the world, people began collapsing. Hospitals were overwhelmed with patients experiencing seizures, hallucinations, and severe psychological breakdowns. Doctors reported the same strange symptom in nearly every case. The patients claimed they could see something in the sky, even when the sky was hidden by clouds. Even when they were indoors, they described shapes moving above the planet, shapes that were far too large to comprehend. Inside the research center in Washington, Dr. Foster stared at the latest data report. The room had fallen silent. One of the technicians slowly turned toward her. "You need to see this." The satellite sensors had finally completed a full scan of the entity. The computer began calculating its approximate mass. The result made several scientists step away from the screen. The being was not just massive, it was impossible. Its density fluctuated constantly. Parts of it seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, but the system still managed to estimate its minimum gravitational influence. The number appeared on the screen. It was equivalent to 70 Earth-sized planets, and it was still coming closer. Back in the desert, Evan walked outside the monitoring station again. The night sky looked wrong now. The fracture had expanded into a massive red wound across the heavens. The stars around it had vanished completely. In their place was a swirling void of dark crimson light, and inside that void, something moved, slowly rotating. Watching the tendril descending from the fracture now stretched across the entire sky. It looked like a gigantic finger pointing toward Earth, and it was almost touching the atmosphere's lower layers. Then the signal reached 24 Hz. The vibration became unbearable. Car alarms began activating across nearby towns. Windows shattered. Radio towers emitted bursts of static, and the voices returned. But this time they were clear. Not whispers, not echoes, words spoken directly into human consciousness. Thousands of people reported hearing the same sentence, the same ancient voice, cold, patient, curious. "Your world," answered the signal. Inside the monitoring station, the main computer suddenly flashed a warning. Signal source identified. Evan stared at the screen. His stomach dropped. The system had finally traced the origin of the broadcast. Not the cosmic entity, not space, not the fracture in the sky. The signal had started much closer than anyone expected. The coordinates appeared on the display. Latitude, longitude, depth, 3 miles underground, directly beneath the Nevada desert, inside a military installation that officially didn't exist. Evan whispered to himself, "Oh God." Because the truth was suddenly clear. Humanity had not just discovered the signal, they had created it. Decades ago, accidentally, and it had been broadcasting into the universe ever since, calling something ancient, something enormous, something that had finally arrived. Above the planet, the giant tendril finally touched the upper atmosphere. Lightning erupted across the sky. The signal surged to 25 Hz, and the fracture in reality widened one final time, because the creature on the other side was beginning to push the rest of its body through.